Nicolas Maduro has just given the United States 72 hours to get all of our diplomats out of their country. So there's been a lot. We've been meddling in Venezuela for quite some time. That was 36 hours ago, so actually we only got a day and a half before a war might start. Are we going to go to war with Venezuela? And of course, the only time Venezuela really did have a dictatorship in the last 20 years, for 2 days under Pedro Carmona in 2002, the Bush administration, the New York Times editorial board, and the IMF all made it crystal clear that they were delighted with it. So, yeah, there's a lot of bullshit that's going on with this Venezuela invasion, or a possible invasion, right? There's going to be a confrontational moment. Now, the problem in Venezuela reminds me very similar of actually how the United States began. So the United States used to be ruled under the Articles of Confederation. That was our first constitution, was the Articles of Confederation, and now we are under the second constitution, which is the U.S. Constitution, the one that we all know and love today. But for the first 13 years of America's existence, it was the Articles of Confederation that ruled over everything. It ruled over the American Revolutionary War and the aftermath up until Shays' Rebellion. When Shays' Rebellion happened, a lot of strong Federalists wanted a strong central government, and so a 1787 Constitutional Convention was convened with George Washington at the helm, and then March 4th, 1789, the Constitution replaced the Articles of Confederation. So what happened to the Continental Congress? What happened to the government that was underneath the Articles of Confederation? So the Articles of Confederation, so George Washington was president from 1789 to 1797. So he died 3 years just before 1800. Or no, he didn't die. He died 1 year before 1800, but he gets out of the presidency 3 years before 1800. So he was president from 1789 to 1797, but the 4th of July was 1776, 13 years prior to George Washington being the president. So who was the president from all those, 13 years? Hancock was, there's about a dozen or so of them, depending on how you define president, but who's the leader? The leader would be the leader of the Continental Congress. So the chair or the president of the legislative branch, since there was no executive branch, was both the leader of the legislative and the executive. That's how the Articles of Confederation was set up. Now, the Articles of Confederation, it was written, deliberated, and eventually sent to states for ratification, so it technically gets ratified 1781, 2 years before the end of the Revolutionary War. So who was governing the Revolutionary War? Well, it was the Continental Congress and the President of the Continental Congress, all under the Articles of Confederation. So that's just in a nutshell what happened with the birth of America. So America had one constitution, and then while that government was functioning, these other guys over here formed their own constitutional convention. So these guys are like, well, what the fuck, right? They're probably pissed. They're probably jealous. Like, what are you all doing over there? We already got the government. We already got the power. We're running things over here. And they're like, well, it's not really working, so we're going to try to, draft a new constitution to see what the fuck is going on. That's what's happening in Venezuela. That is exactly what is going on in Venezuela. You have a constituent assembly and you got a national assembly. The constituent assembly was elected to write up a constitution. They got 500-600 people in the constituent assembly, and then the constituent assembly, since they got supreme constitutional authority, eventually just took all the powers away from everybody. And then the National Assembly was all pissed off because, like the Continental Congress, the National Assembly is just like the Continental Congress, because that's the old government. If you're going to have a body that's writing up a new constitution, well, that constitution is going to be submitted to the people. If the people vote for it, then you're going to have a whole new thing going on. You're going to have a completely different government. You're going to have a revolution. A revolution is going to happen if you can change the constitution of a nation. So let's get into some specifics. There's a timeline. So March 2013 is when Hugo Chavez dies. And then Nicolas Maduro, who has a wife and a child, he was the foreign minister. He was a cabinet member of the Hugo Chavez administration, so he's a Chavista, right? He's the part of the Bolivarian Revolution. So they took power over the interim government as president until there was new elections. So Nicolas Maduro just takes fucking power. I don't know if that's constitution, if it's legal or not. It comes back to where it's very weird to me, because he's going to run the elections, and he's also going to run for president, and he's going to barely win. So, very conspicuous that the person running the interim elections are also the same person that won that very same election. So, March 2013, Hugo Chavez dies. March 2013. 1 month later, April 2013, there's an election, and Nicolas Maduro wins 51%. So he gets to become president for 5 years. That's how long their presidential terms are, 5-year terms, and they can have unlimited presidential terms. So Maduro was just reelected recently, and he's about to start his second term. So compared to the United States, we get 2 4-year terms, and then that's it. But for some reason, he only gets 1 term. He's allowed to have unlimited terms, but he's not even getting his second term, which is what the United States allows our leader to do. So Venezuela's president can get, unlimited time, so they can run forever, right? Maduro can run as many fucking times as he pleases. Later in 2013, November, the Venezuela's legislature gives Nicolas Maduro dictatorial powers, rule by decree, which is very similar to what the United States Congress did when they gave their war powers away to the president in 2001. They gave him dictatorial war powers to go to war with anybody and everybody that he feels like against the terrorist. So Maduro gets dictatorial powers, but this is the National Assembly. The National Assembly is their parliament, their Congress. They have a unicameral government, so they don't have a Senate and a House. They just have one body, and it's like 400 people. So the Constituent Assembly is bigger than the National Assembly. But the National Assembly, I'll say the National Assembly just to be consistent, but they're the legislative body, right? So the legislative body. Maduro gets dictatorial powers in 2013. There's 2014 protests. 43 people died. It's a bunch of dead bodies. Abby Martin went to Venezuela a few years back during these protests, and she saw fascist, capitalist, imperialist, anti-Chavista gearing up like it's a civil war. So I think she almost got attacked, or she was ran out of Venezuela because she essentially was asking the wrong questions. December 2015, there's new elections for the National Assembly, and after the new elections happen, there's an opposition-led National Assembly, an anti-Maduro National Assembly, anti-Maduro legislative branch. Juan Guaido won a legislative representative seat in 2015 when the anti-Maduro National Assembly was elected. That's 2015, 2 years into his administration. The day after, the Supreme Court was replaced. So this is another asterisk by Nicolas Maduro because he had all the Supreme Court replaced. Many in Venezuela declared it a fraud. So you got a National Assembly that was mostly anti-Maduro, and then he got rid of the Supreme Court, which he doesn't have constitutional power to do. The Supreme Court is elected by the National Assembly for 2-year terms. But after that, so that's, an asterisk, right? There was also a quote Maduro had where he said there's separation of powers, but that's not division. So that could be a rallying cry for unity, or again, it could seem dictatorial. He went ahead and took power after Hugo Chavez dies, had an election, got himself elected into the election, and then as soon as 2 years later, which happens in America, right, you have the opposition who gets into power, then there's a clash. So, and I guess he wanted to, I don't know, he replaced the Supreme Court, so but he did have those dictatorial powers by decree, right? He had dictatorial powers given to him in 2013. So if those powers don't extend 5 years, how come the United States dictatorial powers extend 17, 18 years, right? 2001 is when we give the President of the United States unlimited war power against anybody and everybody that he damn well pleases. So for 18 years, we've given our President dictatorial powers. Then we come up to the constitutional crisis. So he got in there 2013. 4 years later, there's going to be a constitutional crisis. And he's going to work on getting a new constitution rewritten, a brand new constitution, but he wants to do it legit, so he gets a constituent assembly elections. He has these elections for organizing these constituent assembly. And so the protest, there was 153 deaths that happened in the protest. The Constituent Assembly was convened by presidential decree, not referendum as was the case in 1999, but he's got the decree power. He's got dictatorial powers by the Congress, just like America. Congress give the war powers to the president, and the Congress give whatever powers to their leader. So 600 Venezuelans, their president. So 600 Venezuelans were elected to write a new constitution subject to approval by referendum. Well, that needs to get finished, right? You got 600 Venezuelans sitting around, write your damn constitution and get some elections, vote on the new constitution, and then whatever the new constitution or the old constitution, either carry a new direction or go back to the old constitution. Give this vote to the people. Now, a lot of people criticize this Constituent Assembly election because 8 million voted, which was a lot less than a lot of other elections. It was only 42% of the people, which is not a majority. But Kentucky elections barely break the 15% threshold. Venezuela has a better democracy than Kentucky. The United States has 46% or so it's not that much better. Most Americans don't vote, so therefore most of the elections are illegitimate. But we've never, one time, if the opposition boycotted the election, well, c'est la vie, tough titties, you just fucked yourself. The opposition, so if the Democrats said we're not going to vote in the next election and then a bunch of Republicans get elected, we're not going to have a redo, we're not going to change anything. We're just going to, just let the Republicans run. They're the ones that got the most votes. We only need a plurality. We don't even need the majority of the people, and then we don't even need the majority of those minority of the people in order to elect somebody. Really, old Jim Bob, old Rufus McGee Jr., old Rufus McGee III. If he votes and nobody else did, then that election is legit. So the Constitutional Assembly is going to be sworn in officially August 4th, 2017. So this is, 2 years and 5 months ago. So the Constituent Assembly has the power to rewrite the Constitution. They have supreme constitutional power, but because they said the opposition boycotted the election, there was a less turnout rate than the Great Patriotic Poll. The Maduro Party, the Maduro people won. So most of the Constituent Assembly are known to be at pro-Maduro. So they're elected July 30th, 2017, after the Constituent Assembly election, and they're getting condemned by everybody. But really, this is just Maduro and Venezuela governing their own affairs. So after the Constitutional Assembly election, the United States sanctions Venezuela, freezing the U.S. assets that Venezuelans own, prohibiting any Venezuelans from entering the U.S., and said that Maduro was a dictator. So preventing Maduro from entering the U.S. and his people. So the Constitutional Assembly, according to their own dictates, according to the presidential decree that the National Assembly gave to the president, the Constituent Assembly actually has more power. They have power over the National Assembly, because once the Constitutional Assembly organizes their ideal government, then that government, that Constitution will be how the government is run, and the old Constitution or the old government will be dissolved. It'll be completely gone. So just like the Articles of Confederation, the Continental Congress, the National Assembly is the Continental Congress of Venezuela. So the Supreme Tribunal, their Supreme Court, said that it was okay for the Constituent Assembly to remove power from the National Assembly, and then there was massive protest for a day, and then the Supreme Tribunal overturned this the day after. So you got a bunch of protests in 2017. During the protest of the Constituent Assembly Constitution, or they're being elected, they haven't got a Constitution yet, and it's going to be put to a vote so the people of Venezuela could vote it down. Maybe we need the United Nations to run the elections. But Juan Guaido, he got a wound from cops' rubber bullets. He says he even had some pieces still stuck in his neck. He's got a scar in his neck. And Juan Guaido is going to be the guy that Donald Trump is sitting there saying should be the brand new president. So Juan Guaido, he has a quick rise through their National Assembly. By 2018, he is named the head of the opposition party. So in the National Assembly, Juan Guaido is 35 years of age. He's 2 years younger than me. So this 35-year-old is going to take over the entire country, and that's bullshit too, which I'll get to after I finish this timeline. So Juan Guaido is named the head of the opposition party in 2018. May 20th, 2018, Nicolas Maduro was re-elected into the presidency. This is the lowest voter turnout rate ever. It was only 49%. Well, that's higher than the Constituent Assembly and much higher than Kentucky at 15% in one Democratic primary. 15% compared to 49%. That means if you just multiply by 5, then Venezuela has 15 times 5? No, so it's 15 times 3. But Kentucky has 3 times worse democracy than Venezuela. Venezuela has 3 times better of a democracy than Kentucky compared to their turnout rate. But 49% isn't a majority. But it's, an election. He was the majority victor, and then he gets inaugurated January 10th, 2019, this year. And it just now, so it's January 25th. This is the day of the Egyptian Revolution. So January 25th is today. This is only 15 days ago. 15 days ago, the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, had just been inaugurated. He just started his second term. Now, what's going on with Juan Guaido? How did he, enter into the picture? So December 2018, last month, Juan Guaido is elected president of the National Assembly. And that's amongst themselves. So that's just like the Speaker of the House or the Senate Majority Leader. It's not the President of the Executive Branch. It's the President of the National Assembly, like the President of the House or the President of the Senate, which would be Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. So Juan Guaido is the head of the legislative branch, just like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. If you put Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and combine them into one person, you would get Juan Guaido. Well, why is that important? Well, the separation of branches says that the president is the president and the legislative branch is the legislative branch. So if you're the leader of the legislative branch, you're not the leader of the executive or the judiciary. You're the leader of the National Assembly, of the legislative branch. So we're picking the wrong side on this. Juan Guaido is not the president of Venezuela. The Venezuelan people did not elect Juan Guaido. The people of Venezuela did not vote for him. So he is not the, how can he be the president? He might say that he's the interim president until there's new elections because the National Assembly is about to get dissolved. So this is a surviving. This is self-preservation. This is a self-preservation mechanism for Juan Guaido. So remember, the National Assembly is a unicameral body. So out of that unicameral body, they elect one president and 2 vice presidents of the National Assembly. They're the third line to the presidency. So if Maduro, something happened to him, then the vice president would become president. If something happened to him, then Juan Guaido would become the president. But he's not the president. He's not the president of that country. After he was elected president of the National Assembly, he was arrested by state security forces, but he was released from detention hours later. So that seems a little conspicuous too. January 5th, 2019, after he's elected president of the National Assembly, the National Assembly invokes a state of emergency. And then they declared Juan Guaido the president. Juan Guaido is of the Popular Will Party, and there's a lot of different countries that are supporting each one of them. And that's it. There's also a National Constituent Assembly. If you put them both together, right, you have one National Assembly and you have a Constituent Assembly. What's the difference? Right, the nation is filled with a bunch of constituents. For France, 1789, they put them both together. They just called their Congress the National Constituent Assembly. So perhaps the Constituent Assembly and the National Assembly can join as one. I don't see the problem, really. It seems like the National Assembly is pissed off because they're going to be dissolved out of power, which is inevitable when you write a brand new constitution. But the National Assembly, they're going to be important leaders for the new government. So the National Assembly, all they got to do is the Constitutional Convention, make sure it's run fine, make sure they have the referendum for the Constitution, and then have a transition period. So the National Assembly needs to regulate all this. They need to regulate, the election for the Constitution. They need to regulate the transition to the new government. That's important. So the National Assembly isn't going to be just stripped of all their power. The National Assembly, if they get their head out of their asses, because I think technically speaking, George Washington had a charter convention, had a constitutional convention, and when George Washington had a constitutional convention, well, then the old fucking government didn't even matter. When George Washington said, this is how we're going to do things, so Maduro, he's revolutionary, he's carrying on, he's consolidating the revolution. Chavez, this is almost, I don't want to say it's the second president, but kind of a second socialist president, a second modern-day president of Venezuela. So he says, we are going to have this constituent assembly to write a constitution. He's right. He gets, dictatorial power by decree from 5 years ago for whatever, why did the National Assembly cede all their powers like that? So now the National Assembly is invoking a state of emergency. So the National Assembly, I think they could get along. I think that this is an internal problem. This is something that they need to figure out, because who's to say that the Continental Congress couldn't have attacked the Constitutional Convention? Who's to say that the government under the Articles of Confederation wouldn't have attacked the government under the Constitution? That was a possibility. That could have happened. But instead, we accepted the authority of the Constitutional Convention over the current government that was going. So the Articles of Confederation got chucked out. You still needed a Continental Congress because they went ahead and passed the damn thing in 87, but he didn't become president until 89. And so that means they crafted the Constitution, then he elected himself into office. So really, George Washington is very much like Nicolas Maduro, right? He's having this, Constitutional Convention, putting himself at the top, and then he's going to get elected into office after he just created this entire brand new government. So that's a timeline of essentially what's going on. I want to talk a lot more about this, about who's going on which side, but there's a timeline that's my understanding of events. If there's something wrong, please go ahead and correct me. But the way I look at this, the way it seems to me, there are some questionable things. He's doing some dictatorial things, but we'd give our president dictatorial war powers. So I don't see how we have no moral superiority over them whatsoever when it comes to implementing their democracy. We cannot say we know democracy better than you do. In fact, Jimmy Carter, he went ahead and assessed 92 elections he had monitored, and he said that Venezuela's elections was the best one. So Venezuela has been running elections, like badasses for decades now. And just because the opposition lost, then they cry sour grapes and they say, the election wasn't even legitimate, it wasn't even real. And we do that every time, right? The Supreme Court, give it to Bush. Obama's born in Kenya. Russia, give it to Donald. So there's always some question of delegitimacy in the beginning of our presidential administrations. I'll talk more about the allies, who's on board, who's not on board, which side. Everybody's splitting into different camps because there's going to be a confrontational moment. This is going to go somewhere. So hold on to your butts, America. You might get into a war here in this hemisphere. We might invade Venezuela for some fucking reason out of nowhere. Is this another distraction? So many distractions with this shutdown. So many distractions.